That card is declined again." Cynthia Draper did not lower her voice. She had learned early in her career that volume was a form of authority, and tonight she wore both like armor. The elderly woman at table 7, silver-haired, dressed simply in a pale grey coat, placed her hands flat on the white tablecloth. Her fingers were steady, her chin was up. But her eyes held the particular bewilderment of someone who knows they have done nothing wrong and cannot understand why the world has not yet caught up with that fact. "There must be an error," Ruth Pallister said quietly. "That account is never empty. Our system doesn't make errors." Cynthia folded the declined receipt into a neat square and set it beside Ruth's untouched dessert plate. "I'm going to need you to pay another way, or I'll have to ask you to leave." The couple at the next table had stopped talking. A man in a tailored jacket near the window discreetly lifted his phone. The waiter hovering by the service station stared at the floor, too young and too new to know what to do. No one moved. No one, except the woman, who had just come through the kitchen door carrying a stack of invoices. Nessa Hartley had worked at Harrow & Stone for 3 years. She knew the sound of the dining room at full capacity, the overlapping murmur of polished conversations, cutlery on porcelain, the occasional soft laugh. She also knew what silence sounded like in a room that was supposed to be full of noise. She had taken 3 steps toward the hostess station before she understood what she was hearing. She crossed the room without deciding to. "Cynthia." Her voice was even. She set the invoices on the nearest empty table. "What's the issue with the payment?" Cynthia turned with the particular patience of someone who believed themselves to be very busy and very important. "The card's been declined twice. It's not your concern, Nessa." Actually, Nessa glanced at the slip. The system flagged 3 other transactions tonight with the same error code. I was literally just looking at the batch files. She looked at Ruth. "May I see your card?" Ruth handed it over without hesitation. There was something in the younger woman's manner. Not pity, not performance, just steadiness. Nessa turned to Cynthia. "This is a prestige visa. They don't decline unless the merchant terminal has a connection issue. We've had 2 of those this month already." She held Ruth's card out to Cynthia. "Run it through the secondary reader at the bar." A beat of silence. "I've already run it twice." At this terminal, Nessa did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The secondary reader at the bar. Something in the room shifted, not dramatically, the way it might in a film. Just a quiet rebalancing, the way a room feels when someone says the exact right thing at the exact right moment, and the person who had been wrong suddenly understands that everyone else understands it, too. Cynthia took the card. She returned 4 minutes later. The card had processed immediately. There was no apology in her posture. There was, however, noticeably less volume. "There was an issue with the terminal," she announced to no one in particular. "Apologies for the inconvenience." She set the receipt on the table, turned, and walked back toward the host stand. Ruth let out a slow breath. Nessa watched her. The way the older woman's hands finally unclenched, the way she reached for her water glass, and held it with both hands the way people do when they need something solid to hold on to. "Thank you," Ruth said. "The terminal on that side goes down at least twice a month. It's embarrassing." Nessa began gathering her invoices. "Your dessert's gone cold. I'll ask them to bring a fresh one." "Please don't fuss." "It's not fuss. They shouldn't have put you through that." Ruth studied her for a moment. The younger woman wasn't particularly polished. Her dark hair was pinned up unevenly, a pen tucked behind one ear. Her blazer was sensible rather than stylish, her frame soft and full in a way that Harrow & Stone's usual clientele, angular, expensive, perpetually on their way somewhere important, was not. She had a smudge of ink on her left thumb that she hadn't noticed. "What's your name?" Ruth asked. "Nessa. Do you work in the kitchen?" "Accounts," Nessa smiled. I live in a room with no windows and argue with spreadsheets for a living. It's not glamorous. Ruth laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that loosened something in the chest. I think you might be the most useful person in this building. Nessa shook her head. Don't tell the chefs. She made sure the fresh dessert arrived, a small slice of tarte au citron, no charge, and then she went back to her windowless office and tried to remember what she'd been doing before the dining room had gone quiet. She forgot about it almost immediately. That was her way. She helped, and then she moved on, because in Nessa Hartley's understanding of the world, doing the right thing was not a story. It was just Tuesday. What she did not see. The man in the dark coat near the entrance, who had not been there when she crossed the dining room, and who watched every second of what had just happened with eyes the color of winter concrete. He had been called many things in Toronto. The press, when they wrote about him at all, called him a businessman. The people who knew better called him Mace. The people who knew him best, a very small group, and a very careful one, called him Evander, and meant it with a mixture of affection and fear that he had long since stopped trying to untangle. Evander Mace was 41 years old, owned 4 legitimate businesses, and several that were considerably less so, and had not been surprised by anything in the better part of a decade. He was surprised now. Not by the terminal error. Not by Cynthia Draper, whose particular brand of performative cruelty he had catalogued and filed away the moment she was hired. He owned 40% of Harrow & Stone, silently, through a numbered company, the way he owned most things, at a comfortable distance, with plausible deniability and very good lawyers. He was surprised by the woman with the ink-stained thumb. He had watched her cross the room, watched her set down her invoices, square her shoulders, not consciously, not for anyone else's benefit, just the way a person does when they know. They're walking into something uncomfortable, and they're going to do it anyway, and dismantle Cynthia Draper's little theatre with a single practical question about the secondary card reader. No raised voice, no speech, no performance, just the right answer, at the right moment, for a woman no one else had bothered to help. His mother was still sitting at table 7. Her tarte au citron had arrived. She was eating it with the contentment of someone who had learned, in her 74 years, to savor exactly what was in front of her. Evander's jaw tightened in the way it got when he was thinking about something he hadn't expected to think about. He turned away from the window and walked back to his car. His head of security, Brecken, was waiting with the door open. He was a large, quiet man who had been with Mace for 11 years and had learned to read silences the way other people read faces. "Everything all right?" Brecken asked. "Find out who the bookkeeper is." Evander got in, the one who helped my mother. Brecken's expression didn't change. "The woman from accounts?" "Yes. She's been with the restaurant 3 years. Nessa Hartley, 28. Lives in Leslieville, takes the TTC, picks up her coffee at the same place every morning. Clean record. No association with any of our interests." Evander looked at him. "I pulled a preliminary when she went for the manager," Brecken said, unapologetic. "Force of habit. And she makes $42,000 a year, has a cat named after a mathematician, and apparently once spent her lunch break helping an elderly man figure out his transit card on the Bloor platform." He paused. "She seems genuinely unremarkable." Evander considered this. In his experience, genuinely unremarkable people were either exactly what they appeared to be, which was rare, or very good at appearing to be what they weren't, which was far more common. He had learned to tell the difference. "No approach," he said. "No contact. Just watch." "And your mother?" He glanced out the window toward the restaurant's warm-lit facade. "She can take care of herself." A pause. "She always has." Ruth Pallister came back to Harrow & Stone on a Thursday afternoon. which was not a day anyone came for the dining room. The lunch service was winding down. Nessa was eating a sandwich at her desk when one of the servers knocked and said there was a woman asking for her. She found Ruth at the bar with a cup of tea, looking entirely at home. "I wanted to return this." Ruth held out a pen. It had a chewed cap and a faint ink stain at the clip. "You left it on the table." Nessa stared at it. "You came back for my pen. I also wanted to thank you properly." Ruth looked entirely unashamed. "Last time you rushed away before I had the chance." Nessa sat down on the stool beside her. "You really didn't have to." "I wanted to." Ruth set the pen between them. "You weren't going to come to me, so I came to you." There wasn't much to say to that. So Nessa didn't say anything. Instead, she signaled to the bartender for another cup of tea and spent the next 40 minutes talking to Ruth Pallister about nothing in particular. The unreliability of card terminals. The early cold snap that had come down from the north this year, whether sunflowers or ranunculus held up better in a cold vase. Ruth had opinions on all of it, delivered with the confidence of someone who had stopped worrying about whether her opinions were welcome sometime in her 60s. By the time Nessa went back to her desk, she had the vague, pleasant sense of having talked to someone who had actually listened. Ruth came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. It became, without either of them formally deciding it, a routine. Nessa came out of the back at 2:30. Ruth was at the bar with her tea. They talked until Nessa had to return to the reconciliations. Nessa did not think to ask who Ruth was, beyond what she offered. A widow. A grandmother. A woman who had lived in Toronto long enough to have opinions about the city before the condos, before the traffic, before the winters that were almost warm enough to be unsettling. A woman who laughed easily and listened well, and had, Nessa thought, an extraordinary ability to make you feel like whatever you were saying was the most interesting thing she'd heard all week. "You should get out of that back office," Ruth told her one Thursday, not unkindly. "You're too sharp to spend your whole day arguing with numbers." "I like numbers," Nessa said. "They don't have agendas." "People have agendas. Numbers have answers." Ruth tilted her head. "But you could find answers in a room with a window, at least." Nessa smiled. "I've been meaning to report the bulb." "Report the whole room." Ruth wrapped her hands around her mug. "You intervened for a stranger in front of a room full of people who were all hoping someone else would do it. That's not an accounts department personality." Nessa looked down at her tea. "I just knew where the secondary card reader was." Ruth made a sound that said she didn't believe that for a second, and was too polite to say so. Evander's reports were meticulous and, after 4 weeks, increasingly frustrating in their ordinariness. Nessa Hartley bought her coffee from a place on Queen Street that had a hand-painted sign and mismatched chairs. She helped a different elderly person navigate a different piece of technology on a subway platform. She declined a date from one of the junior servers, not unkindly. She stayed late 3 Tuesdays in a row to fix a discrepancy in the March invoices that no one had asked her to fix. There was no angle, no scheme, no attempt to leverage what she'd done for his mother into anything whatsoever. He found this, irrationally, more interesting than if there had been. On a Wednesday morning, he walked into Harrow and Stone before the kitchen opened, told the front-of-house manager he was doing a quarterly review, which was true, in the way that most of his cover stories were true, and asked to see the accounts office. He was not prepared for the flickering fluorescent bulb. Nessa Hartley looked up from a monitor running what appeared to be 4 spreadsheets simultaneously. She had her hair down today, pushed back with a pencil. She wore a deep green cardigan that had seen better days and didn't appear to care. She looked at him with the expression of someone who is very busy and is politely waiting for him to explain himself. "I'm with the ownership group," Evander said. "I know." Nessa gestured to a folder on the edge of the desk the only organized thing in the room. Mr. Calloway mentioned someone was coming in for the quarterly. March through June reports are pulled, reconciliation summaries on top. I'd offer you a seat, but the other chair's got a box on it. He looked at the box. It said Property Tax 2024 in marker. I can stand. Suit yourself. She turned back to the monitor. The flagged transactions are tabbed in green. There are 7. 5 are explainable, 2 aren't. I've written notes on the 2. He picked up the folder. The notes were meticulous, not verbose, not padding, just the information required to understand exactly what the discrepancy was and what would need to happen next to resolve it. He had accountants that cost 8 times what she earned who did not write notes this clear. He looked up. She was watching him read with the particular stillness of someone who has learned not to fill silences with noise. She caught his eye, and then looked deliberately back at the monitor, neither flustered nor performative about it. The March figure on page 3, he said. You've flagged it, but the note says pending confirmation. What are you waiting on? A supplier invoice that was supposed to arrive in April and hasn't. I've asked the kitchen manager twice. If it doesn't show by end of month, I'll recommend we escalate with the vendor. Do it now. She looked at him. Send the escalation today, he said. Don't wait for end of month. Pending invoices from April are a liability. A pause. You're right. She made a note on the pad beside her keyboard. Not a production of it. Just wrote it down because it was the correct thing to do. He found that remarkable. In his experience, people who were told they were wrong either argued or overcorrected into apology. She did neither. She simply incorporated the information and moved on. He was still thinking about it when he reached the door. The bulb, he said without turning around. Sorry. The fluorescent bulb, it's flickering. Report it today. There was a beat of silence. Then, I've been meaning to. Do it today. He walked out. Behind him, he heard her write something else on the pad. He came back on Friday. This time he brought coffee. 2 cups, from a place on King Street, and a legitimate reason to review the June projections. The legitimate reason was not, if he was being honest with himself, the reason he came. The fluorescent bulb had been replaced. The room was noticeably brighter. She glanced at the 2 coffees and then at him. You guessed oat milk. The place on Queen Street uses oat milk. She went very still for a half-second. Then, you've been there. Once. She accepted the cup. She did not ask any further questions, which was either incurious or perceptive. He was beginning to suspect it was the latter. They worked through the June projections in near silence, which was more comfortable than it had any right to be. She corrected one of his assumptions about the Q3 forecast without hesitating, explained why in 2 sentences, and then waited for him to agree or push back. He agreed, because she was right. You're thorough, he said, when they finished. It's easier to be thorough than to clean up a mess later. She closed the folder. Then, after a pause, your mother's lovely, by the way. He went still. She mentioned she has a son who works too much. The corner of her mouth moved. She didn't say his name. She rarely does, he said. She enjoys the suspense. Nessa laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that didn't have anything to do with him. He had heard a great deal of laughter in rooms where he was present. The careful kind, the diplomatic kind, the kind designed to make him feel that he was funny when he was not. This was not that kind. She's been coming in on Thursdays, Nessa said. We've been drinking tea and solving the world's problems. She mentioned. He kept his voice even. She seems fond of you. I'm fond of her, she said it simply, like it wasn't a strategic statement, because it wasn't. He left without telling her his full name. He told himself it was caution. The same caution that had kept him alive and operational for 15 years in a world where people's interest in you was rarely uncomplicated. He suspected, if he were being honest, that it was something closer to wanting her to know the man before she knew what the man was. The gala was the Mace Foundation's annual fundraiser. Cancer research in honor of what Ruth had survived 6 years ago, held at the Fairmont in mid-November. 500 guests. Black tie, the kind event where the room itself did the work of establishing who mattered and who didn't, and everyone understood their position without it being stated. Nessa had not planned to attend. She would have declined politely and sent a small donation and felt genuinely good about it. Ruth had asked her in person on a Thursday, over tea, with a directness that made refusal feel unkind. "I'd like you there," she said. "Not because you need to be anywhere, because I want you there." Nessa wore a dress she'd bought the previous spring and never had occasion to use. Midnight blue, simple, the kind of dress that required confidence to carry off. Standing in front of her bathroom mirror the night of the gala, she had looked at herself for a long time and thought, with the clear-eyed resignation she had cultivated over years, that she was built for a life of useful things, not beautiful rooms. She went anyway, because Ruth had asked. She found her bearings at the edges, the way she always did in rooms full of people who seemed to know exactly where they belonged. She could read a room the way she read a spreadsheet, where the money was, where the attention went, who was performing ease and who actually had it. She moved through the crowd slowly, nursed a glass of sparkling water, and told herself she was there for 30 minutes, and then she could leave with a clean conscience. She did not see Cynthia Draper until it was too late to change direction. The former manager of Harrow and Stone was here as someone's guest, wearing a red dress and the particular expression of someone who had been waiting for an opportunity. "I didn't expect to see you here." Cynthia's voice was pleasant, which was worse than if it hadn't been. "I didn't know the accounting staff came as guests." Nessa set her glass down carefully. "Cynthia, I'm serious. Who invited you?" She looked around with theatrical curiosity. "Did someone bring you as their plus one? That's sweet." Several people nearby had gone slightly quieter in the way people do when they sense something worth watching. "I was invited by a friend," Nessa said. "Right," Cynthia smiled. "Well, I'm sure they meant well. These rooms can be a lot, though, for someone not used to them." She tilted her head. "I remember you being far more comfortable in the back office. Seems like that was good advice." It was not the first time in Nessa's life that a room had tilted like this. The first time had been in high school. The most recent had been 3 years ago, at a work function where someone had made a comment about whether the restaurant's uniform ordering had accounted for, as the person put it, all body type. She had become very good at the particular skill of standing, completely still, while something sharp moved through her. "Excuse me," she said. She turned. Cynthia's hand closed around her wrist. "There's a service exit on the east side," Cynthia said, still pleasant. "I can show you where it is if you're feeling out of place." The grip was not hard. It was proprietary. It was the hold of someone who believed, in this moment, that she had permission to move other people around like furniture. "Let go," Nessa said. Cynthia did not. Let go of her wrist. The voice came from somewhere to Nessa's left. Quiet, completely level, the kind of quiet that fills a room the way sudden cold does. Total, immediate, impossible to ignore. Cynthia released her. The color went out of her face in the time it took to turn around. Evander Mace was not a large man in the way that demands physical space. He was large in the way that made other people aware of their own posture. Composed, still, a stillness that radiated not calm but restraint, the careful management of something that did not need to raise its voice to be understood. He stepped forward, not in front of Nessa, beside her. He looked at Cynthia with something that was not anger. It was considerably more uncomfortable than anger. It was the assessment of someone calculating the exact weight of what they had just witnessed and deciding what it was worth. "I'd like you to leave," he said. Around them, the room was paying attention now. I didn't." Cynthia's voice had lost its pleasantness entirely. "I was only—" "The woman you just grabbed," Evander said, without raising his voice. "Spent an evening several weeks ago correcting a mistake that you made. One that humiliated an elderly woman in front of a room full of people who all watched and did nothing. She did it without being asked, without recognition, and without any interest in being thanked." His gaze held Cynthia's without moving. "Tonight, you've done the same thing again, in a different room, with the same audience." He looked briefly at the people nearby who were watching. "I don't know what you hope to accomplish," he said, "but I'd like you to leave." Cynthia left. The room exhaled. Evander turned to Nessa. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not gratitude exactly, and not surprise. Something more careful than either. "Are you all right?" he said. She stopped, started again. "How do you know about the terminal incident?" He held her gaze for a moment. "Then, I think it's time we had a proper conversation." They found a quiet corner of the mezzanine, away from the noise of the main event. Below them, the gala continued its careful choreography of wealth and generosity, indistinguishable from any other year. Nessa held her water glass in both hands. She had heard Evander Mace's name by the end of the evening, not from him, but from the careful geometry of how people moved around him, the way conversations repositioned themselves when he entered a room, the word that passed from one guest to another like a small fire catching. "You own the restaurant," she said. "Part of it. You've been reviewing the accounts." "Yes." "And your mother?" She stopped. "Yes." He let that sit for a moment. "She didn't tell you because she wanted you to know me without knowing that. I don't think she intended it as a trick. She's craftier than she looks. She really is." Nessa set her glass down. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this information." "You're not supposed to do anything with it." He turned so he was looking at her directly. "I'm telling you because you deserved to know before someone else made sure of it, and because what happened in that room tonight." He stopped himself. "The way you conduct yourself. I've been paying attention for several weeks and I still don't have a framework for it. That's a very complicated way to say something straightforward." The corner of his mouth moved. Occupational habit. What's the straightforward version? He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I came into the accounts office on a Wednesday morning, expecting to find someone ordinary. I found someone I haven't stopped thinking about." Nessa looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. "I know what I look like," she said. "In rooms like this, standing next to someone like you." "What do you look like?" She didn't answer. "Tell me," he said. "What do you think you look like, standing in this room?" "Out of place." The words came out smaller than she'd intended, like someone who wandered in through the wrong door and is hoping no one checks the guest list. Evander was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "The night I first came into the dining room," he said finally, "you were the only person moving. Everyone else was waiting for someone else to handle it. You came through a door carrying invoices, and you set them down, and you solved the problem, and then you made sure she got fresh dessert." He looked at her steadily. "You were the most purposeful person in that room. You were also the most beautiful." Nessa went very still. "I'm not performing," he said. "I don't do that. I'm telling you what I observed." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He held her gaze. "I'm choosing to because you have a habit of making yourself small that has nothing to do with how large you actually are." She looked at him for a long time. Her hands had stopped fidgeting. "You own part of my restaurant," she said finally. "Yes. Your mother has been coming to have tea with me every Thursday." "Yes. And you've been reading my quarterly reports. They're exceptionally well organized." She laughed despite herself, short, startled, the real kind. "This is a very strange situation." "It is," he agreed. Below them, Ruth Pallister had appeared in the mezzanine doorway. She looked up at both of them, with the serene expression of someone who has arranged everything precisely as intended and is very pleased with how the evening has gone. Nessa followed his gaze. "Crafty," she said again. Incredibly. 3 months later, Harrow and Stone had a new card terminal. Reliable. The kind that did not go down twice a month and humiliate elderly guests. It had been installed quietly, without announcement, as part of an ownership group upgrade. Nessa's office had a window now. She had reported the bulb, and in doing so, mentioned the window situation, and someone had apparently taken it seriously enough to rearrange the back-of-house layout and give her the small room at the end of the hall that looked out onto the alley and, on clear days, a narrow strip of November sky. She did not connect these two things to Evander, or rather, she suspected the connection and chose not to raise it, because she had learned that some things were better taken as they were than examined for motive. Cynthia Draper had been served a formal complaint by 2 of the staff she'd managed over 3 years, which had resulted in consequences that were, by all accounts, proportional and lasting. Nessa heard about it through the kitchen and thought about it for approximately 30 seconds. On a Thursday in February, she was at the bar eating lunch. Her usual spot, the one that had been Ruth's spot first, when Evander came in from the cold. He had snow on the shoulders of his coat, and his hair was damp. He looked exactly like a man who had walked from somewhere in a hurry and wasn't going to admit it. He sat down beside her. "She's not coming today," Nessa said. "She sent me a message. Grandchildren are visiting." "I know." He unwound his scarf. "I'm not here for the Thursday arrangement." She looked at him. He looked back. "I was wondering," he said, "whether you'd like to have dinner. Not here. Somewhere you don't know the accounts." Nessa considered this for a moment. The ceiling above the bar, the familiar smell of the kitchen starting up for afternoon prep, the way the light came in through the front window in winter, thin and very clear. "I should tell you something first," she said. "All right. I'm going to keep asking about the terminal upgrades and the window." His expression shifted, a slight compression at the corner of his mouth. "And if I admit to both of those, then I'm probably going to ask about the rest of it. What you actually are, what that means, what it means for this." She gestured, briefly, at the space between them. "That's a fair list of questions. I have more. I'd expect nothing less." He looked at her. "I'll answer all of them. Over dinner if you'll come. And if you decide afterward that the answers are too much, I'll respect that." A pause, but I'd like the chance to make the case. Outside, a transit bus went by in the grey winter light. Through the window, Toronto continued its reliable, indifferent hum. Traffic, pedestrians, the city going on the way cities do, regardless of what is happening in any particular window or bar or small quiet corner of a restaurant where 2 people are figuring something out. Nessa picked up her coffee cup. "Tuesday works," she said. Evander Mace, who had not smiled in a board meeting in 11 years, who had sat across from men 3 times her sizes and not blinked, who had been called many things in this city and had long since stopped being moved by any of them, allowed himself one small, genuine thing. He smiled. "Tuesday," he said. And Ruth Pallister, reading the message on her phone from 50 blocks away while her grandchildren pulled at her arms, closed her eyes for a moment and was quietly, completely satisfied. Some meetings change an afternoon. A few change an entire life. And occasionally, in a city as large and indifferent as Toronto, someone sets down a stack of invoices and walks across a room. And the whole rest of the story begins there, in that small, unremarkable act of going towards someone who needed help. It had cost nothing. It had meant everything.